Dutch multinational. Does it matter?
Yeah, obviously it does, although it's less and less the issue, because geographical position, if you say Dutch, depends on the type of company. There are Dutch companies that export. There are Dutch companies who are truly, like I told this morning, transcultural. In other words, they have many centers. Philips is at the beginning of that example. So you can't talk about for the Dutch. The Dutch, however, have certain talents and certain weaknesses that helps internationalization. For example, if we focus on social media, I think the Dutch have a culture that fits very nice with social media. You don't care about face, you just straight in the face and that. You're an idiot, but don't take it personal. And that is something with the low context media that we are using is very helpful. I think the Dutch are fantastically spoiled, if you like, with great infrastructure. So there are advantages in the Netherlands. Plus, we know that for an international firm, we can hardly survive being in the Netherlands. It's almost the opposite problem for big countries like the UK or the US, where the biggest market is around, which is very often a problem in going international. Because, for example, language. We often forget language, but there are a lot of people in the world that only speak one language. And the Dutch have to speak other languages. Because otherwise, look at this conference. In France, this would never be in English. This would be in French, and I would be the only one understanding it.
And so you've also studied the dilemmas. What do you think in the next years will be the multinationals that we know that will make the largest jump forward? Because you know which companies can solve dilemmas quickly. What companies will surprise us in the next years?
I think, going back to what was said in the previous discussion, is the quality of leadership. And you can never predict. Even Apple, you know, now Steve Jobs is gone, what will happen? I don't think his successor is bad, by the way. But the issue is it starts with leadership and the remarkable way of leaders to make themselves obsolete. Because value-driven organizations are the successful organizations. In other words, it's part of servant leadership. You set the tone by ways of behaving rather than content, because especially with the world we're living in, content and intelligence is everywhere. We can distribute it, but it's the frame that we need to make in the way people act. And I think that's where the difference will be made. And to some current examples, I think Applied Materials, my favorite company, they make machines to make microchips. It's a bit ASLM, but then 5 times as big. They are in nanotechnology, and it's amazing. Their top 100 has 59 nationalities. Their management team, 7 people representing 9 nationalities, because 2 of them have a double passport. And but they're completely driven by values. And I gave some examples this morning. The yin and yang values, and I think those are the companies for the future, and they're the best in international.
Okay. So and Philips is a good example, obviously, as well. So and. What we were wondering in the pre-discussion is, how do you cope managing 52 different Facebook pages, for instance? Because you're responsible for that, right?
Well, I'm not responsible for managing them, luckily. No, but I am part of the cross-functional social media team of Philips, so I'm definitely part of the group that is trying to solve these issues. And it's really about providing a framework. At the end of the day, you cannot run them on a global level. I mean, just language is an issue, cultural understanding and local relevance is an issue. I will never be able to control a Chinese Ren page. Just purely from a legislation point of view, you just need to get into so many details of that country that it's just not possible. So you need to do it through the training of people. By providing a global framework and indeed values and a thinking pattern that you can then roll out. So a lot of time is invested in producing, and I will share that later on, in producing training material. So together with the countries and the country organizations, understand their needs, create training material that then solves and answers many of the questions that they have, and then go train. There's not much more that you can do. It's train, 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 and enable. And that's really the way we're trying to approach it.
Okay, great. Thanks. Any questions at this point for one of the panel members? No question, Mark? Yes?
Because I have a question. We're talking now about multinationals, you know, head office in Amsterdam and different companies worldwide. But there are also a lot of companies that have a head office in the Netherlands and a lot of regional offices. For example, I'm working with a bank with 156 local banks. Is it the same thing as a multinational worldwide, or is this different when it's within the Netherlands and different regions?
What's the jump in?
I feel it's, not knowing the organizational structure, of course, but I feel it's the same. I mean, Philips has got 4 head offices in 4 different markets: North America, Europe, Asia, and China, and the rest of the Far East. And those 4 market groups are basically controlling what is going on. So we are, in that sense, a decentral organization in essence. Next to that is that it's also decentralized by sector. So we have B2B in healthcare, B2B in lighting and consumer products, and what a lot of people don't know is that 60% of our turnover is actually B2B and not consumer at all. So already those differentiations in different markets put you in a situation that, from a global strategy point of view, it really needs to be done with these markets, in these sectors, in these countries, and if you don't do it that way, you will not succeed in your strategy, full stop.
Perhaps another comment is who's your client? And I'm not asking you because a bank has a certain type of client, but I worked 9 years with Shell, and Shell was interesting as a company in the sense that, in fact, everything was international by definition. Oil is you can't differentiate the products of oil, at least hardly, and the operations were international. Okay, you drilled in the floor, but a seismologist, it's very technical. So the way you structure your stuff, but also you use social media, is very depending on at the end of the day, what is your customer? And customers very often, now B2B is more international than the local customer who buys, I don't know what, light for the winter or so. And that's a Philips product.
I didn't plug it, you did.
So I think that now by the way, there's a wonderful book, we will not solve it this afternoon, by Samantha Ghoshal and Bartlett wrote a book, Managing Across Borders. And they have a lot of interesting insights in how to organize international strategies depending on the things, product, market, and what have you.
Okay. One more question? Yes?
This morning you talked about leadership and followership as well, like the servant leader. And I was wondering for Philips, we talked a lot about how to lead the social media program, but how do you listen to your own social media program? So you have a lot of countries to manage. How do you know what's happening over there, and how do you keep track and lead by example?
Yeah, well, in that sense we don't lead by example, because we don't, on a global level, we don't execute a local campaign. What we do is when we launch a new approach, we try to guide them as much as we can. So we provide thought leadership in the shape and form of people to actually participate in certain programs so that we roll them out, so that we actually do it together. But in terms of listening, again, from a central level, we provide the tooling. So we've partnered up with a social listening agency that is actually specialized also in cultural and language differences. Because the average tool will not really help us out there if we need to monitor this in 64 countries where cultural load is very important to understand and interpret what social media is then telling you. So that is something that we deploy next to other metrics that we have, like Net Promoter Score metrics, and we combine them all into one dashboard, which we then, on a global level, are able to monitor. We can see which country is doing better and worse. We try to then understand what's the underlying reason, and once we understand that, we're able to then steer and say, okay, well, clearly they need more support in this area, they are doing really well, so what can we learn from the people that are doing really well, and so that is a way to do it for us.
Will you cover that in your session later on as well?
Slightly.
Slightly, okay. Okay, so Adam, what would be your tips for people dealing with international strategy?
So the way IQ is structured currently, we're an international company, and we have people from Greece, people from Italy, all 50 people in this startup, and different skill sets with social media. So in a lot of ways, it's like herding cats. So going back to what Thomas was saying about training sessions internally are incredibly important. bi-weekly we have a training session on LinkedIn or Twitter, how to best to use it, and then, you know, segmentize that. So for the sales team, they'll use Twitter in a different way than BD will use Twitter.
Bi-weekly, so you have 25 trainings per year.
There's a lot, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and those, you know, we keep them short and sweet, about a half hour,
Yeah.
and we have 5 different tactics that they can employ and a checklist that they can go through. So there's very actionable tactics that play into our overarching strategy and goals.
Okay, great. Thanks. So short and sweet. That was this social talk as well. Later on, Thomas will be talking in the great room downstairs, and I'll leave the closing words for Fons.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. No, that's a coffee. Yeah. No, I got some Twitters that I again pissed off females because they get pregnant and they cry, and it showed by the Twitter. But obviously that was a joke, and I hate. In Germany, I explain jokes. First of all, I have 3 daughters. I have still a wife. Yes. I have 2 dogs who are female. I just became grandfather. I have a granddaughter. So you understand at least the context within which I'm making. Now, on a serious note, there are 2 reasons why females should be more dominant in anything, and that is in business. We have a competence profile, and the competence profile looks how good are you in what I call the 4 R's, and the 4 R's are recognition, respect, reconciliation, and realizing our routine. And it's interesting that females score about the same as men when they're in business. In other words, a different profile. Men lose points because they rather go for one side or the other side, so they're not so good in reconciling. They rather choose. Females rather go for the compromise. And I think it's a female strategy to survive in a male environment. However, if we take females outside of business, they score significantly better than men in reconciling dilemmas. Now, a lot of research has shown that one of the new competences we need, and I'm supporting that obviously because part of the research was done by ourselves, is that dilemma reconciliation is the competence of the future. And females are just more talented in that. Okay. You see morphologically it's a difficult word, but it's the way the brain functions. And men are rather good in right or left brain or down in the center. And females have a corpus callosum that is much more active between the brain halves. And that might morphologically explain that females are better in dilemmas. They say, men say, listen, I'm cooking, kids don't fight. Yeah? Females just kick the kids and cook at the same time because they reconcile those dilemmas in their own way. So, for business reasons, we should have more females. Only the men should change the rules of the game because we don't allow females to do this in the most effective way. They rather go for compromise. Second reason, much shorter, my 3 daughters need a job. And let's now have coffee, don't we?
Okay, yeah. Thanks a lot.